It's a bit wet this morning, but I think it's clearing up this afternoon. So today I'm just doing a 15-mile walk to Rye. I've just stopped in the village of Westfield for a little coffee break and to get out of the rain for 10 minutes. So I'm about 5 miles in now, so about 10 miles to go. According to my hiking app, there's some wood carvings on the footpath just outside the village, so I'm going to have a look at them on the way out. This is a wooden sculpture on the 1066 country walk. It's called the Far Banks Henge, and they've planted hawthorns in the wooden sculpture, so in the spring there's a circle of blossom, which must look quite nice. I'm just approaching a huge floodplain. I think I'm approaching the River Breed. I think that's how it's pronounced. And the river, it goes all the way into Rye. It's about 4 miles from here. So I should be approaching the town in about 2 hours. Quite a sunny start to the day, which is quite nice because the last 2 mornings have been quite soggy. So today's plan, I'm walking to Ashford. The first part of the hike, I'm following a canal towards a village called Ham Street. I think it's called the Royal Military Canal. I'll have to have a look on my map later on. Then from Ham Street I'll just cut across country towards Ashford. And then the next day I'll be walking to Canterbury. And I think when I get to Canterbury I'm going to pop back home for a few days because I just want to swap some bits of gear around before I continue on my hike. And then when I get to Canterbury, when I leave Canterbury, I'll be following the North Downs Way back towards Guildford and then back to Winchester. So the Royal Military Canal was built in the early 19th century during the Napoleonic Wars, and you could walk the whole 28-mile length of the canal from Seabrook in Kent to Cliffend in East Sussex. So it sounds quite a nice walk actually, because it's quite a nice walking route. Just arrived in Ham Street. I'll be following this footpath for the next few miles now. This is the Saxon Shore Way, which goes towards Ashford, and it goes through a nature reserve just outside Ham Street, so I'm just heading for the nature reserve now. Slight change of plan again. I think when I get to Ashford I'm going to call it a day for about a week or so and then come back. One of the reasons being it's still very wet at the moment. A lot of the walk has been like this. I've been wading through a lot of boggy paths for the last 2 or 3 days. So I think I'm going to, when I get to Ashford, I'll go back home for about a week. Hopefully it'll dry out and I'm going to get change my kit around a bit and then come back and then continue onwards to Canterbury. I've just arrived in the centre of Ashford. I don't think it's a very touristy town. There's a big Eurostar railway station here for trains to Paris, but there's nothing really to look at, so I'm going to head straight down to the train station. So I'm going to go home now for a few days. Hopefully the ground will start to dry out. I think it's the first day of spring today. It's March the 20th. So if I come back in a few days time, hopefully it'll be more spring-like weather and I can continue my walk to Canterbury. So until then, goodbye. Continuing my walk to Canterbury. So I popped back home and I've changed some of my kit around, which I'm quite glad about because my backpack is a lot lighter now. I'm sort of gradually investing in ultra lightweight biking gear. So every time I go on a journey, my backpack's a little bit lighter. So I've got it down under 10 kilo, the base weight. So that's quite good. So today I'm following the Stour Valley. I'm heading for a village called Y, and then from there there's a Sustrans cycle path that heads into the centre of Canterbury, and it looks quite nice. It follows the River Stour right into the centre. I left quite early this morning because it's going to be dry this morning, but tonight and tomorrow it's going to be quite wet. But I've booked 2 nights in Canterbury, so I'm hoping to have a look around the town and explore the place while I'm there. I've just arrived on the Stour Valley walk, so I'll be following the footpath on and off towards Canterbury, but I think I'll be sticking to the roads quite a bit because it's still very wet weather and the fields are still very boggy. So I'll be sticking to the country lanes quite a bit, I think. Just arrived in Y. So I'm just going to look for the familiar Sustrans cycle route signs, and then I'll just be following the cycle route into Canterbury. I've just arrived at the cycle route that goes into Canterbury. So this is a network of routes that have been planned by an organisation called Sustainable Transport, or Sustrans, and it's a very handy network of cycling routes around the country, and usually they follow disused disused canal paths and disused railway lines. So I'm just going to follow these signs now into the centre of Canterbury. Just arrived in Canterbury. Unfortunately, it's just started raining, so I'm just going to have a little break now. So I've got a couple of days here, and hopefully when the rain stops, I'm just going to have a look around the old town. Another wet and windy day, but I'm just spending the day wandering around the centre of Canterbury, so I'll be in the drive quite a bit. So I'm just arriving into the old town of Canterbury. This is the old city wall. I'm just starting my little walk. There's a gardens, I think it's called Dane John Garden, so I'm just going to start my little tour of Canterbury from there. This is the Dane John Mound, and this is where the Normans went immediately after the Battle of Hastings in 1066. William the Conqueror came out to Canterbury and they built a castle here, a Motte and Bailey castle, and this mound was the Motte part. So I'm just going up here now to get a view of Canterbury. I read online that the gardens are called Dane John Gardens. It's because originally this was where the Norman keep used to be, and the French word for a castle keep is donjon, and that's where that's how this area originally became known as Dane John Gardens. So quite close to here is the city walls, which are still in very good condition. I'm just going to follow the city wall down to the later castle. I think it was a 12th century castle, which is just north of here. So the city wall dates back to the 14th century, because at that time people were worried about French invasion of southeast England, and so they built this huge wall. But there has been a defensive city wall here since when the Romans were here in about 270 AD. but it's over the centuries it's been rebuilt and improved. So just down here is the old Norman castle. I've just arrived at the ruins of Canterbury Castle. Unfortunately, it's closed to the public because of falling masonry, so I just had to have a look at it from outside. So this was built between 1086 and 1120, and it used to be quite a major castle in this part of the country. Then Henry II built a castle in Dover, and that became the most prominent castle in southeast England. And so Canterbury Castle just fell into decline after that. So now I'm going to pop down to Westgate. So during the medieval period, there's 7 huge city gates built around Canterbury, and this one is Westgate, and this overlooks the River Stour. I'm just going to have a look at it from outside the old town. So there used to be a Roman gatehouse here, and then that was replaced in around 1370 when they started building this very impressive gatehouse, and it was very well protected. When they built it, it had a drawbridge and a portcullis and had very heavy gates, and they had 18 gun loops, and these were the earliest gun loops that were put into a British castle. So now I'm going to have a wander around the town centre. I'm just heading down to Christchurch Gate, and this is the main entrance to the cathedral. This was built in the early 16th century. This little square is the old butter market. This is Christchurch Gate. So this was built in the early 16th century, and there's a lot of Tudor style architecture. There's a lot of coats of arms of the important people of the Tudor era, and I think there's what Catherine of Aragon's coat of arms is up there as well. So now I'm going to hop into the ticket office and get a ticket for the cathedral. I've just arrived at the entrance to Canterbury Cathedral. So I've got the official guidebook, so I'm just going to have a look at that as I wander around. So, a brief history. In AD 597, missionaries from Rome converted the King of Kent to Christianity. Augustin, who's the leader of the mission, was consecrated as Archbishop, and they made Canterbury the seat of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and ever since then this has been the home of the Archbishop of Canterbury. So the entrance to the cathedral is through the southwest porch, and this was built during the reign of Henry V around 1422. So Canterbury Cathedral, of course, is very well known as a place of pilgrimage, and people have been coming here for centuries. And this dates back to the famous murder of Thomas Becket, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury here in the 12th century. So the famous story is that King Henry II, he used to be a good friend of Thomas Becket, and Thomas Becket was actually the royal chancellor, and King Henry thought that if he made him the Archbishop of Canterbury as well, then that would give King Henry power over the church as well as the monarchy. But when Thomas Becket became the Archbishop, things sort of soured between the king and the Archbishop, and eventually Thomas Becket, he resigned as the chancellor, and he antagonised the king, and eventually the 4 knights of the king, they thought that King Henry wanted Thomas Becket murdered. And so I think the 29th of December 1170, the 4 knights came to the cathedral, and they came through this door, and they looked for Thomas Becket, and this is where he was murdered. So this part of the cathedral is known as the martyrdom, and this is where the knights came through the door, and this is where Thomas Becket was on his way to Evensong, and they hacked him to death just here. And following the murder of Thomas Becket, the Pope made him a saint, and ever since then Canterbury Cathedral has been a hallowed place of pilgrimage. Very impressive stained glass windows here. I think some of the stained glass windows are dedicated to the pilgrims who travelled to Canterbury. And of course there's the famous book, the Canterbury Tales, that's also synonymous with Canterbury. And I think in the town centre there's a statue dedicated to Geoffrey Chaucer, so I'll be going down to have a look at that later on. This is Mercery Lane, and a lot of the buildings along here date back to the Tudor era as well. I'm just going down to the statue that's dedicated to the Canterbury Tales. So the Canterbury Tales was a group of stories that was written by Geoffrey Chaucer between 1345 and 1400. And it's about a group of pilgrims who travelled from Southwark in London down to Canterbury. So Geoffrey Chaucer's book, The Canterbury Tales, follows the journey of a group of pilgrims. There's 31 of them, including Chaucer himself, as they walked from the Tabard Inn in Southwark to St Thomas Becket's shrine in Canterbury Cathedral. And the host at the inn in Southwark suggested that each pilgrim tells 2 tales on the way out and 2 on the way back, and the best storyteller would have got a free supper when they returned to the inn in Southwark. And this is the statue in the centre of Canterbury dedicated to Geoffrey Chaucer. And quite close to the statue is Easterbridge Hospital, and this is an almshouse. This was built in the 12th century, shortly after the death of Thomas Becket, and it was used as a place for poor pilgrims to stay while they were visiting his shrine. And very close by is the old weaver's house, and this is a very picturesque Tudor building overlooking the Stour River. I'm going to have a look at the famous Crooked House of Canterbury. I'm just approaching the crooked house of Canterbury. So many years ago, when they built houses, they had to pay a lot of tax on how much ground space it took. So they made the bottom floor, the ground floor, they made it as small as possible. Then the upper floors, they would make them much bigger. So many of the Tudor style buildings look like this. The reason it slants is because some time ago they were trying to put in an internal chimney. They didn't do it correctly, and the extra weight of the chimney forced the building to slant over. So that gives it its very unusual look nowadays. Many people think that Charles Dickens included a description of the crooked house in his book David Copperfield, because he wrote the paragraph, "A very old house bulging over the road, leaning forward, trying to see who was passing on the narrow pavement below." And many people think that he was describing the crooked house of Canterbury. Well, I think I've filmed enough for this video now, so I'm going to go back to the hotel and upload this video, and then tomorrow I'm carrying on towards the North Downs Way. So thank you very much for watching the video, and I hope to upload another one soon. Bye.